She had every reason to stay silent, no badge, no gun, no powerful last name to hide behind. But when Naomi Carter pressed her trembling hand against the cold steel door of the most dangerous man in the city and whispered, "They're going to kill you tonight," she chose his life over her own. The rain had been falling since noon, and by the time the dinner rush hit Sora, the most exclusive Korean fusion restaurant in all of downtown Atlanta, the windows had fogged completely from the warmth of bodies, boiling broths, and secrets. Naomi Carter had worked this floor for 2 years. She knew every crack in the black marble tile near table 7, every flicker of the amber pendant light above the private booth in the back left corner, the one that was always, without exception, reserved. She knew which chef oversalted the doenjang jjigae on Fridays, knew which sommelier pocketed tips, knew which regulars were lonely and which ones were dangerous. She'd learned early in life that invisible people see everything. At 29, Naomi had mastered invisibility like an art form. She moved through rooms the way water moves through stone, quiet, persistent, unnoticed. She was tall with deep brown skin and natural hair she kept pinned back on shift, and she had the kind of face that people looked past rather than at, which had always hurt when she was young and had simply become useful now that she was older. She wore the restaurant's uniform, black on black, and she carried her notepad with the practiced ease of someone who had long ago stopped counting the hours between her first table and her last. She needed this job. That was the truth beneath every polished smile, every, of course, sir, every refilled water glass and recited special. Her mother's dialysis was 3 times a week. The apartment in Vine City had a leak in the ceiling above the bedroom that the landlord had been getting to for 4 months. And Naomi's younger brother Darius had just started community college, which meant the financial weight of their small family, all 3 of them, plus the persistent ghost of her father's unpaid debts, rested entirely on her shoulders. So she smiled. She was efficient. She did not make trouble, and she did not invite it. And she absolutely, under no circumstances, looked too long at the man who sat in the back left booth. His name, she had learned through overheard whispers and the nervous way the entire kitchen staff straightened whenever his reservation came in, was Kang Jun-seo. He was 36, Korean-born, Atlanta-raised, and he owned Sora the way some men own a chess piece, not because it was his most valuable possession, but because it served a function. The restaurant was a front. Or at least, that's what everyone who worked there quietly understood without ever saying aloud. Kang Jun-seo was the head of the John Syndicate's southeastern operation. Naomi knew this the way she knew most dangerous things, not from being told, but from watching. From the way men came to his table and left looking smaller than they'd arrived. From the 2 silent figures who always sat at the bar nursing club soda and scanning exits. From the particular quality of hush that descended over the dining room the moment he walked in, the way sound itself seemed to ask his permission to continue. Tonight he arrived at 7:47 p.m., 13 minutes later than usual. She noticed because she noticed everything. He was dressed in a charcoal suit with no tie, the top button of his shirt open, and he moved through the restaurant the way a current moves under still water. You didn't see the force of it until something got pulled under. He was broad-shouldered and angular-faced, with dark eyes that swept a room in exactly the way trained eyes do, not looking at things, but past them, cataloging threat and exit simultaneously. He was not, by any conventional understanding of the word, a good man. Naomi had made her peace with that a long time ago. She brought him his sundubu jjigae extra firm with no egg, his barley tea at exactly 67 degrees, his banchan arranged with the kimchi on the left. She never made eye contact longer than courtesy required. She never asked how his evening was going. She read the room, and the room said, serve him well, stay small, go home. That had always been enough. Until tonight. It started, as most catastrophic things do, with something small. The woman arrived at 8:15, a full table ahead of schedule, and Naomi was the one who showed her to the private booth. She had seen her before, of course. Soo-yeon Park. Kang Jun-seo's fiancée. She was beautiful in the polished, deliberate way of someone who had worked very hard to make beauty look effortless, sharp cheekbones, silk blouse the color of old cream, hair falling in a perfect line to her collarbone. She wore a ring on her left hand the size of a small apology. Naomi seated her and took her drink order, sparkling water, a glass of Sancerre, and turned to go. Actually, Soo-yeon said, her voice low and sweet and precisely calibrated, could you make sure my table is against the wall tonight? I'd love the extra privacy. It was a normal enough request. Naomi accommodated it, shifted the table's orientation slightly, ensured the drape of the booth curtain could be pulled if desired. What was not normal was what happened 40 seconds later when Naomi was returning to the service corridor with a tray and happened to pass within 3 feet of the alcove beside the bar, the small architectural nook that no one sat in because it had no table, only a decorative shelf of celadon pottery and a faint sound of HVAC, and heard Soo-Yun's voice, completely different now. Sharp. Efficient. Wrong. He gets there at 9. East exit. Tell them he'll have 2 men with him, not 3, Jean is sick. Yes. I'm sure. Just make sure it looks clean. Naomi did not stop walking. Her tray did not tremble. She made it to the service corridor, set the tray down on the steel counter, and stood very still for exactly 4 seconds, the sound of the kitchen, the clatter and hiss and shouted Korean, washing over her like something distant. Then she understood what she'd heard. And the floor, in a manner of speaking, dropped out from under her life. Drop a comment below, what would you have done if you'd overheard that call? Keep reading. She ran through it twice, the way you run your tongue over a sore tooth because you need to be sure it hurts. Soo-Yun's voice. The east exit. He gets there at 9. 2 men, not 3. Make sure it looks clean. Someone was going to kill Kong Jun Seo tonight. And his fiancée had arranged it. Naomi picked up a fresh tray, loaded 3 glasses of water on it, walked back out onto the floor, and smiled at Table 11's questions about the tasting menu. She needed to think. Here was the calculus of her life, laid out plainly. She was a black waitress in a restaurant owned by a Korean crime syndicate. She had 0 connections, 0 protection, a sick mother, a brother in school, and rent due in 9 days. The man who was about to be killed was not a good man. People like him had hurt people like her, hurt communities like hers, in ways that were documented and undocumented, direct and indirect. She owed Kong Jun Seo exactly nothing. She told herself this clearly. And then she thought about what looking clean meant in the context of a coordinated hit at a restaurant's east exit at 9 o'clock at night, and she thought about the 2 men at the bar, his security, who didn't know they were walking into something, and she thought about how many other people might be near that exit, innocent people, staff, the busboy Miguel who was always at the back dock on smoke break at 9 sharp. She thought about the fact that she had heard the call. That made her a loose thread. Which meant that whether she warned him or not, whether she acted or stayed quiet, she was already inside this. Soo-Yun had made a phone call in a restaurant full of people, which either meant she was arrogant, or she was confident that anyone who overheard it would be too afraid to speak. Or that anyone who overheard it wouldn't survive to repeat it. Naomi's hands were completely steady as she cleared table 9. Invisible people see everything, she had always known. What she had not known, until this exact moment, was what you were supposed to do with everything you saw. She glanced at the clock above the service bar. 8:22 p.m. 38 minutes. She looked toward the back left booth, where Kong Jun Seo had not yet arrived, where Soo-Yun Park was now sipping her Sancerre and scrolling her phone with elegant, unhurried fingers. Naomi Carter made her decision. Not loudly. Not with drama. The way she made most of her decisions, quietly, in the back of herself, where no one could see. She turned and walked toward the kitchen to put in a food order. And she began to plan. The plan was simple, which meant it was also fragile. Naomi couldn't walk up to Kong Jun Seo's table and whisper danger into his ear. Not with Soo-Yun already seated 20 feet away, already watching the room with the calm, proprietary eyes of a woman who believed she had already won. Not with the 2 men at the bar, his security, thick-necked and still as furniture, who would intercept anyone approaching their principal without clearance, including a waitress with a water pitcher and a secret. She couldn't call the police. That thought lasted approximately half a second. Calling the police into a Mafia syndicate's flagship restaurant, on the word of a waitress who'd overheard a phone call, would either get her laughed out of the precinct or get her killed before the squad car arrived. And there were police in this city, she knew this personally, historically, in her bones, who would be more interested in the arrest potential of the room than the safety of anyone in it, including her. She couldn't text anyone. She had no number, no contact, no door in. What she had was access. She was the waitress assigned to the back left booth. At 8:31 p.m., Kong Jun Seo arrived. He came through the front entrance, which told her something. he wasn't using the east exit tonight for arrival, only departure. He moved with the same contained authority she had catalogued 100 times before, except tonight she watched him differently. She watched him the way you watch someone standing at the edge of something they can't see. His suit was dark navy, his jaw freshly shaved, and there was something almost imperceptibly different about him tonight, a looseness around his eyes, a fraction of softness she hadn't seen before. He was happy, she realized. Or as close to it as a man like him ever got. He was coming to have dinner with his fiancée. He was walking toward the woman who had sold him to his enemies. Naomi intercepted him 6 feet before the booth with a small, professional smile and a folded hand towel over her forearm like a shield. "Mr. Kong," she said. "Before I seat you, the kitchen wanted me to let you know your usual banchan order is running about 8 minutes behind. Chef Park sends his apologies. Would you like to start with something while you wait? Perhaps step to the bar." It was the smoothest lie she had ever told, and she had told some smooth ones. He looked at her. Not past her, at her. And that was unusual enough that her pulse stuttered. His eyes were darker up close, and sharper, and they held the particular quality of intelligence that never fully rests. He looked at her the way she looked at rooms, cataloging, measuring, deciding. "I don't believe," he said, his voice low and accented at the edges, Atlanta smoothing but not erasing soul, "that Chef Park has ever been 8 minutes behind in 4 years. The silence between them was exactly 2 seconds long. "No," Naomi said, holding his gaze with everything she had. "He hasn't." Another beat. She watched him process the deviation, the script broken, the small irregularity that a careful man's mind would snag on like fabric on a nail. "The bar," he said. "Yes, sir." She led him. His security shifted off their stools and redistributed, flanking loosely. Naomi set him at the far end of the bar, the corner that faced the room, and put his back to the wall. She'd chosen it specifically because it was the farthest point from Soo-Yun's sightline without leaving the floor. She poured his barley tea. 67 degrees. She set it down. And then she leaned forward, just slightly, the way you lean when you're asking about ice preferences or whether the heat in the room was bothering him, close enough that only he could hear, far enough that it looked like nothing. "Your fiancé made a phone call tonight," she said, each word precise and quiet as a scalpel. "East exit. 9 o'clock. They know you'll have 2 men, not 3. She said make it look clean." She straightened. Picked up the tea pitcher. Met his eyes once more. His face had not changed. Not a flicker, not a flinch. But something behind his eyes had shifted the way tectonic plates shift, not visible on the surface, catastrophic beneath. "Your banchan will be ready shortly," she said, and walked back to the floor. Her hands, for the first time all night, were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs as she walked and breathed through her nose and thought about her mother's dialysis on Thursday and Darius's tuition and the ceiling leak and everything, every ordinary thing she was risking right now with 6 words delivered over a tea pitcher in a restaurant owned by a crime syndicate. She thought, "What did you just do, Naomi?" She thought, "The only thing you could." Behind her, at the bar, Kong Jun Seo lifted his tea and drank it slowly and did not look at his fiancée's booth. The clock above the service bar read 8:39 p.m. 21 minutes. The next 17 minutes were the longest of Naomi Carter's life. She worked her section. She smiled at table 11, refilled water at table 14, recited the Galbi gym preparation to a couple on a date who asked 3 follow-up questions. She was present in body with a thoroughness that was almost artistic, because her entire mind was doing something else entirely, tracking the room, calculating angles, waiting for the moment everything either resolved or exploded. Kong Jun Seo remained at the bar. He did not go to Soo-Yun's booth. This was the tell. Because a man who dismissed what she'd whispered would have gone directly to his fiancée, brushed it off as a strange waitress's strange behavior, ordered his food and his evening. Instead he sat with his tea and his stillness and the 2 security men who had subtly, so subtly that only someone watching for it would notice, repositioned themselves. One now stood near the east corridor. The other had drifted toward the front entrance. Naomi noticed. She also noticed when Soo-Yun noticed. It was 8:51 p.m. when the energy in the room changed, when Soo-Yun looked toward the bar and found Jun Seo there instead of walking toward her, when something flickered across her composed face. Calculation, quickly buried. She sent a text from her phone, thumb moving fast, once, twice, and then she set the phone face down on the table and picked up her wine glass and was, once again, perfectly serene. Naomi was at the service station behind table 12 when she felt a presence at her shoulder. She did not startle. She had been expecting this. "Walk with me," said a low voice. It was one of June SEO's security men. Not threatening in tone, not yet, but not a request either. He had a wide face and a small scar above his left eyebrow, and his suit jacket did not lie flat on one side in the way suit jackets don't lie flat when there is something beneath them. Naomi set her tray down. She walked. He led her through the kitchen, which went briefly, confusingly silent as she passed through, and into the manager's office at the back, a small room she had been inside exactly once before, for her hiring interview 2 years ago. It smelled of cedar and old paper. Kang Jun SEO was standing by the window with his hands in his pockets. The door closed behind her. "Tell me everything," he said. Not loudly. Not aggressively. Just the simple, direct architecture of a man who had not survived this long by asking questions twice. Naomi told him. Word for word, exactly what she'd heard. Soo-Yun's voice stripped of its honey. The east exit. 9 o'clock. Jean being sick, 2 men, not 3. Make sure it looks clean. When she finished, the room was quiet enough to hear the rain. June SEO said nothing for a long moment. He was looking at the window, which reflected the room back at them rather than showing the alley outside. She watched his reflection, the set of his jaw, the stillness of him, and she thought he looked, for a fraction of a second, like a man who'd reached into his chest expecting to find his heart and found something removed. "Why," he said finally, "did you tell me?" The question was quiet and genuine and it sat between them like something neither of them knew how to hold. Naomi thought about the true answer, which was layered and complicated and involved her own fear and Miguel on smoke break and what clean meant and the particular weight of knowing something and choosing to carry it. She thought about what it cost to be the kind of person who doesn't look away. "Because I was there," she said. "And I heard it. And that made it my problem whether I wanted it to be or not." He turned from the window then, and looked at her directly, fully, the kind of look that doesn't calculate but simply sees, and Naomi held it because she was tired of making herself small and right now there was no performance required, only truth. "You understand what you walked into," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I understood that before I walked into it," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not softness exactly, more like recognition. The way 2 people from different countries recognize a word they both know. "Your name," he said. "Naomi Carter." He nodded once, slowly. "You'll stay in this room until it's handled." "My shift." "Your shift," he said, with the quiet authority of someone for whom other people's schedules simply ceased to exist in emergencies, "is over." He said something in Korean to the security man at the door. Then he looked at her once more, briefly, with an expression she couldn't fully name, not gratitude exactly, not yet, and walked out of the room. The door clicked shut. Naomi sat down in the manager's chair, pressed her palms flat on her thighs, and for the first time since 8:22 p.m., let herself breathe. Outside the office, through the wall, she could not hear what happened. But she pieced it together later, the way you piece things together from aftermath and testimony and the things people's faces say when they don't know you're watching. June SEO did not go to Soo-Yun's table. He sent a message through a channel she would never know, and within 12 minutes, before 9 o'clock, before the east exit, before whatever had been waiting in the rain outside could execute its careful choreography, the men who'd been hired to wait were no longer able to wait. Not because of violence. Because Kang Jun SEO had survived this long by being 3 steps ahead of violence, which is how you stop it before it starts. And at 8:58 p.m., Soo-Yun Park received a phone call at her table. Naomi heard, later, that she'd gone pale. That she'd set her wine glass down very carefully, the way people set things down when their hands suddenly don't trust themselves. That she'd looked toward the east corridor, once, just once, and found it blocked. That she'd then looked toward the front entrance and found it equally, quietly, impassively occupied. That she had understood, in that moment, that the trap had not sprung on the man she'd meant to catch. It had sprung on her. This is the moment in the story where I need you to stop and ask yourself something uncomfortable. If you'd been in Naomi's shoes, would you have spoken up, or walked away and told yourself it wasn't your business? Leave your honest answer in the comments. No judgment. Just truth. They brought Naomi out of the office at 9:22 p.m. The restaurant had been quietly, efficiently cleared. The remaining diners had been informed of a private event requiring early closure, comped their meals with gracious efficiency, and guided out. The staff had been sent home. The floor, usually warm with amber light and the sound of conversation, was now just a room, still and strange, the pendant lights casting small golden circles on empty tables. Kang Jun SEO was sitting at table 2, not his usual booth, not the bar, just a plain table near the center of the room, with a glass of water and his jacket draped over the chair beside him. He looked older than he had at 7:47 when he'd walked in. Not in years. In weight. Soo-yeon was gone. How and where were questions Naomi decided, wisely, not to ask. He gestured to the chair across from him. She sat. For a moment neither of them spoke, and the rain on the windows filled the silence in the way rain does, with a sound that makes every other sound feel small and far away. 2 years, he said finally. You've worked this floor for 2 years. Yes. I never knew your name. Most people don't, she said. That's usually the point. He looked at her steadily. Not for me. Not anymore. He paused. I need to understand why you risked yourself. Truthfully. Not the answer you gave earlier, which was real but incomplete. She considered him, this man who was dangerous and complicated and sitting across from her like an ordinary person in an emptied restaurant while the rain came down, and she decided that the moment had earned honesty. My brother starts college this semester, she said. My mother is sick. I have rent due in 9 days and I've been invisible in rooms like this one for so long that I think I started to believe that was my permanent condition. That people like me just witness things, and absorb things, and go home and don't talk about it. She held his gaze. And then I heard her voice on that phone. And I thought about Miguel at the back dock. And I thought about your security men who didn't know. And I thought, how many times do you hear something true and say nothing because you've decided it's not your lane? She spread her hands flat on the table. It was my lane. I was standing in it. Kang Jun SEO was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, she's been feeding information to a rival syndicate for 7 months. We knew there was a leak. We didn't know the shape of it. A pause, tight, controlled. I gave her the ring 4 months ago. The grief in that sentence was not performed. It was the grief of a man who had trusted something and found it hollow all the way through, and it sat in the room like a third person. I'm sorry, Naomi said. And she meant it. Not for the syndicate politics, not for any of the complex moral architecture of his world, but for the simpler human devastation of loving someone who was counting your days. He looked at her as if the apology surprised him. As if he'd expected her to say nothing, or to offer a professional condolence, or to keep her face carefully neutral the way service staff are trained to do. You could have said nothing, he said. You had every reason to. I know. You had no reason to trust that I wouldn't, he paused, choosing the word carefully, overreact to the messenger. I know that too. And you came anyway. I came anyway. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and in the amber light he looked like a man trying to locate something he'd lost a long time ago and had almost stopped looking for, something that might be called, in a different kind of story, faith. Your rent, he said. That wasn't why I know what it wasn't. He looked at her directly. I'm asking you to let me address what is real. You have a sick mother. A brother in school. Rent in 9 days. His voice was even, plain, completely without performance. These are facts. And there is a debt here that is real and significant, and I don't carry debts. Naomi opened her mouth. I'm also, he said, before she could speak, looking for a new operations manager for this restaurant. Someone with 2 years of institutional knowledge, excellent observation skills, and the judgment to know which information matters and when to act on it. The silence between them was different now. Not dangerous. Not heavy. Something else, something with more air in it. That's a real position, she said slowly. I don't do gestures, he said simply. I do transactions that make sense. This one makes sense. She looked at him for a long moment. Read the room, the way she always read rooms. He was telling the truth. I'll need to think about it, she said. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the suggestion of one, the possibility of it. Of course. He stood. She stood. He reached into his jacket, she didn't flinch, though a month ago she might have, and placed a business card on the table. Plain. Just a number. Naomi Carter, he said, as if confirming something he intended to remember. Kang Jun Seo, she said back, and it was the first time she'd said his name directly to him. He inclined his head once, the smallest acknowledgement, and turned toward the door. 3 weeks later, the ceiling in the Vine City apartment got fixed. Not by the landlord, who had still not returned the call, but by a maintenance crew that arrived on a Tuesday morning with a work order that listed the repair company's address in Midtown and charged nothing to the tenant. Naomi stood in the hallway and looked at the work order for a long time. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her pocket and didn't say anything about it to her mother, who was resting after dialysis and didn't need to carry the complexity of it. Some things you accept. Some things you just quietly receive and say thank you into the air and let it be what it is. She had called the number on the card 4 days after the night at Sora. She had negotiated the terms herself, methodically, with the careful precision of a woman who had spent 2 years learning what things were actually worth in a room where prices were never posted. She had conditions. She kept her name on the schedule alongside any new title, because she would not stop working the floor entirely, not yet, maybe not ever, because the floor was where she understood things. She required a contract. She required that her family remain unentangled, unnamed, and uninvolved, now and in perpetuity. She required full management authority over staff hiring and customer experience without interference. He had agreed to all of it without negotiation. Which told her something about how much he had meant what he said. Her first act as operations manager was to give Miguel, the busboy who smoke broke at the back dock at 9 p.m. every night, a schedule reassignment to the front of house. She didn't explain why. She just moved his shift and gave him a raise and watched him walk a little taller when he came in, and thought about all the ways you protect people without them ever knowing they needed protecting. Her second act was to formally recommend 2 kitchen staff for promotion who had been overlooked for 18 months. Her third act was to learn the name of every person on the floor. Not because she'd been asked. Not because it was in her job description. But because she knew what it meant to be unseen, and she decided, in the particular quiet way she made most of her decisions, that if she was going to be in this room, she was going to make it a room where people were seen. It was 6 weeks after the night of the rain when Kang Jun Seo came into the restaurant and sat not at the back left booth but at the bar, and asked, when she passed, if she had a minute. She sat 2 seats away from him with her clipboard, professional and present. Soo-yeon is in custody, he said, matter-of-factly. Her associates are being handled through other channels. It's resolved. I'm glad, she said. And then, because she was still Naomi Carter and she had never quite learned to leave a room alone, are you okay? He looked at her. That direct, calibrating look that had startled her the first time she'd received it fully. He said slowly, carefully, as if selecting each word from a great number of options, better than I expected to be. She nodded. Understood. I made an error in judgment, he said. About someone close to me. I prided myself on reading people correctly. It appears I had a blind spot. Most people do, she said. For the people they love. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, Atlanta moved in its usual way, indifferent and enormous. You didn't, he said. Have a blind spot. That night. You read everything correctly. I'm used to reading from the outside, she said simply. It's easier when you're not inside the story. He turned his glass slowly on the bar. I find myself thinking, he said, with the deliberate cadence of someone being unusually careful with language, that someone with your particular skill of observation and clarity of judgment is, he paused, good to have near. The sentence hung in the air between them, wider than its words. Naomi looked at him for a long moment, this complicated, dangerous, genuinely solitary man who had just told her, in the careful language of someone who had not said anything like this to anyone in a long time, that she mattered to him. Not as an employee. Not as an asset. As a person. As someone he wanted near. She was not naive. She knew what near meant, in the orbit of someone like him. She knew the risks were real and the world was not simple, and nothing about this situation folded neatly into a tidy shape. She also knew that she was tired of deciding, in advance, what she wasn't allowed to reach for. "I'm already here," she said quietly. He looked at her. And the corner of his mouth moved, not the suggestion of a smile this time. The smile itself. Small, real, and rare as everything true. "Yes," he said. "You are." Her mother met him, eventually, on a Sunday afternoon when he arrived at the Vine City apartment with doenjang jjigae in a sealed container, correct temperature, extra firm, no egg, because Naomi had mentioned once, briefly, that her mother hadn't had proper soup since the dialysis had made eating complicated. Her mother, Dorothy Carter, who had survived 40 years of hard things with the particular grace of women who bend without breaking, looked at this formal, serious Korean man standing in her small living room holding a container of soup and said, without missing a beat, "Did my daughter make you bring that, or did you bring it yourself?" "I brought it myself," Junesio said. Dorothy looked at him for a long moment with the measuring eyes her daughter had clearly inherited. "Sit down then," she said. He sat. And Darius came home from class and found a Korean crime syndicate boss at the kitchen table doing homework revision with his mother, and looked at Naomi with an expression of pure bewilderment, and Naomi just pointed at the stove where the soup was warming and said, "Set an extra bowl." Life, she had always known, does not resolve neatly. But it resolves. Months later, when someone asked her, one of the new servers she'd hired, a young woman from Decatur named Kezia who had the same careful, watchful eyes Naomi had recognized the first time she'd seen her own reflection, asked her what the most important thing she'd ever done at Sora was, Naomi didn't tell the whole story. She wasn't sure she ever would. She just said, "I stopped being invisible on purpose. I let someone see me coming." Kezia thought about that for a moment, then said, "Was it worth it?" Naomi looked out across the floor, her floor now, in every way that mattered, at the amber lights and the black marble and the full, breathing, living room of people who didn't know and would never know how close everything had come to going differently. At the back left booth, where a man with dark eyes was reading something with a cup of tea at exactly the right temperature, and who looked up when she crossed the room, not past her but at her, the way he always did now. "Yes," she said simply. And that was true in the way only the most important things are true, completely, without qualification, without needing anyone else to understand it. She straightened her clipboard, smiled at Kezia, and walked back onto her floor. "You just read about a woman who had every logical reason to stay quiet, walk away, and protect her own survival, and she still chose to speak. She wasn't a hero. She didn't have backup. She had a sick mother, unpaid rent, and a brother counting on her. And she walked through a closed door anyway. So here's the question I want you to sit with, and I mean really sit with it. Is there something you've been watching from the sidelines, telling yourself it's not your lane? A truth you've been carrying in silence because the cost of saying it felt too high? Naomi's story says, the cost of silence has a price too. You just don't always see it until it's too late. Leave a comment below. Tell us, what would Naomi's moment look like in your life? What's the door you haven't knocked on yet? And if this story moved you, share it with one person who needs to hear it today. One person. That's all. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do, is care.